by way of background, I mean, you play so many roles right now, or fill in so many roles as it relates to complex financial crime, BEC, the real estate sector. If you don't mind, maybe just a quick minute or two on your background and maybe what a day in the life looks like.
Yeah, sure. So with the Secret Service, I am a financial fraud investigator, and I sit in a unique position. I sit in our Global Investigative Operations Center in Washington, D.C. And what that kind of allows me to do is kind of see these type of crimes from a very high level and see them operate and executed across the globe, and then also able to dive in and break them down piece by piece. So I can really see the cyber artifacts that are going on. I could see the social engineering. I could see the money laundering. I can kind of see them as a whole and then put the picture together, not only for prosecutors, not only for judges, but also for public and private partnerships, awareness, victim education, things like that. And I've been doing the role now for about 7 years in the GIOC, where I help run and manage our business email compromise mission desk. Along with, I've added outreach and education to my portfolio to really help push the message across. Because Tom, as you and I know, when it comes to these type of fraud schemes, how many victims have we spoken to that don't know this exists? You know, even though the problem is so pervasive. And
I know, it's like almost everyone. It's almost everyone, whether, hey, I might have saw something in an email or they might have made some mention to it, but in most cases, whatever knowledge transfer was attempted to be made, it didn't stick where they identified that their life savings or their business liquidity is at risk and could be gone in a single transfer.
Yep. And so, you know, as an approach to this from my end, where I sit and what I do is it's a three-pronged approach really to fight business email compromise, particularly that in the real estate sector. And first things first is our cases and intelligence, right? We are constantly working cases, getting into the background of these, figuring out who's doing this, and then trying to prosecute the bad actors who are pulling this off. Secondly, one thing you and I work together a lot is our rapid response. We try to aid victims up front when these happen as quickly as possible and try to make them whole, whether that's recovering money, whether that's mitigating the compromise that occurred, or some other type of action we can do to assist the victims. And then lastly, it's the education and awareness piece that we're, you know, frankly doing today. It's getting the word out about these fraud schemes so that hopefully down the line, we can have an educated and vigilant populace that will see these up front and stop them.
And you have an entire team that I know, and we all benefit as an industry from, where, I mean, we're personally sending things in, I mean, daily, every single day. It seems like 7 days a week right now. We're getting some request for funds recovery assistance, or, you know, account analysis or something. So you're being modest, but I will voice over Stephen in his background here that, I mean, they're really doing an amazing job of compressing that time frame from victim identification and vetting that will help support to, you know, the receiving or multiple receiving financial institutions of the funds to try to get our arms around what's moving. We're going to get into funds training.
So that lays the background of how the Secret Service really intersects between victim identification. We'll share intelligence around what we're seeing when we're activated or requested by a victim to recover funds. The next section we're going to talk about is what are we seeing in business email compromise. And for those of you that were down in Orlando yesterday, I spoke in the morning for the Florida Land Title Association, and we were speaking about this idea that while we talk about wire fraud as a crime, the real crime really sits in social engineering, because by the time the transfer of the funds take place, it's a voluntary transfer. Somebody is voluntarily opening up a bank account and transferring funds to another individual. The crime has already taken place in the sense that somebody's been socially engineered into believing that that destination account is somebody that can be trusted, and they're transferring those funds in their best interest. And the framing of that is important because The wire fraud is just the monetization of business email compromise. Business email compromise is the formal cybercrime that is leveraged by social engineering, or to which social engineering is leveraging those activities. So let's see if we can get the next video to show here. So this next video is a little bit longer, and Stephen and I have a more in-depth conversation about what we're seeing as it relates to business email compromise in the real estate sector and real estate transactions.
Let's go up to 80,000 feet. Well, you mentioned business email compromise. In your words, just maybe explain that. We'll have hundreds of people, coming in, and some of them may be new employees to a disbursement team or escrow team. Those, we'll have some that are wire fraud victims like myself on the title side. But let's just frame business email compromise, and maybe let's start to talk about social engineering as kind of that root cause.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I like to boil business email compromise and sort of any cyber-enabled financial fraud down to really one thing, and it's the interception and weaponization of what I call contemporaneous and privileged information, meaning information that is timely and that you would only think that the person you're doing business with would have that information. So think about a real estate deal, right? The closing dates, all the specifics that go into it, the numerous different transactions that are going to go on with it, all the different parties. Our bad actors are stealing this, right? They're doing that through, some type of cyber breach in some way. We can get into that later. But the main driver behind that is the social engineering they're using to weaponize that information against our victims, right? They're doing spoof domains. They're creating really well-crafted emails. They're posing as a buyer or a seller, and they're using different things to really get that trust of the victim to get that money in hand in a fraudulent means.
So how are they getting access to the email account? So when you do a post-mortem and you're working up kind of a case file, any common denominators that you're seeing, especially like this year in particular?
Yeah, so there's several common denominators that they use to get into an email account. So obviously we all know what phishing is, but in general, phishing is a targeted email to somebody where they're trying to get you to provide information that you don't normally would. So you get an email, for instance, that says, hey, this is your email service provider. You have 4 emails in quarantine. Click this link right here to get access to those emails to make sure it's something that's not something important that you need to look at. You think to yourself, oh yeah, that looks innocuous enough. I'll click that link. You click the link, right? It brings you to a website that looks exactly like your email service provider's web-based website, and it prompts you to put in your email address and password. You think, okay, cool. Yeah, I guess I got to log in. It's been a while. So you go and provide your email address, hit next, ask you for your password, and you provide that in, and then hit next. And then nothing really happens. It just kind of spins and then times out on you. But what did happen was in the background, your email address and password was just broadcasted out to a bad actor who will then go and log into your email account as soon as possible, or when you're not expecting, and they'll only log in once. This is what's kind of crazy about the whole fraud scheme is they only log in once, and they go to your settings and they set up settings to create email rules to auto forward out all of your emails. So any email you receive is being auto forwarded out to a different email inbox, and then that auto forwarded email is being deleted. So you're not even seeing this. This is all happening in the background. So that's one of the major ways they really like to target their attacks if they're going after somebody specific. Another way they like to get into email accounts is to simply buy data off the dark web. We've all had emails or accounts or different things that have been involved in data breaches. The one thing our bad actors want are email address and passwords, usernames and passwords. And they can buy these for pennies on the dollar and then go and try them and see if that password still works. Oftentimes, passwords haven't been changed, or if they have, they've only been changed slightly. So our bad actors can almost garner a guess to get into those accounts. So there's just a couple different ways that threat actors are accessing that good information.
So let me recap simply. They focus in on someone's email, somebody to get email access.
Mhm.
Phishing email, something comes through where they're gonna harvest the username and the password. Within seconds, I understand, they go in, to your point, they log in, they make these rule changes, and then that's it. The user doesn't really experience anything. They're not locked out of their email account. There's no suspicious activity in the email account, but behind the scenes, they're just lifting off all these communications. And then do they programmatically sift those? Do they put rules or filters in place? Like, I get several hundred emails a day. Like,
Yeah.
Good luck. Like, I don't want to read them.
Exactly.
But somebody else, right? I mean, same thing for you. Like,
Exactly.
how do they make that efficient at scale if they've got breached, if they have a couple hundred emails breached, let's say that they're monitoring, or thousands, I don't know.
So they get efficient. So in those same email rules, I made a blanket rule to auto forward out all of your emails, but they don't want all of your emails. They don't care about everything you're doing. They just want the good stuff. So they'll create the email rules to actually be tailored to only forward out emails that contain the word wire, account, invoice, closing, what have you, and they can get very specific. In fact, one victim, we do forensic runouts when we locate victims to see what's going on in their system. I went out and did a system with the forensic runout, and as I'm looking at the email environment, the one compromised email account had 136 separate email rules set up on the account to literally auto forward out anything that involved a client or vendor they're dealing with, so that they could intercept and go directly to the client or vendor with invoices and redirect every single invoice payment. So 136 on one email.
So let me pull that thread, and then I need to come back to who's ultimately a target on this. What we've seen, and I want to confirm this from your perspective, in a lot of cases, the individual or the company's email that has been breached is likely not the target, unless there's an internal whaling or some type of internal scam that they're going to try to play. But that's where you mentioned harvesting and weaponizing information. So title companies breached, and now I've got exposure maybe on the buyer side on an incoming wire, or if a seller or a listing agent's breached, I got exposure from a title company dispersing money out. Is that what you see? Because you mentioned, hey, this company was breached, and all of a sudden they went right to their customers and suppliers.
Yep, that's a great point. So when we're looking at these, and oftentimes the hardest part about fighting business email compromise is that there's always multiple parties involved. And usually the party that's breached, that has data or information stolen from them, is not the financially aggrieved party. They, information stolen from one company and then used against another company or another victim to get them to send money elsewhere. So now you have two victims, right? You have the victim that loses money, and you have the victim that has the data breach.
So if we think about this in a waterfall, we have data breach, to your point, contemporaneous and privileged information. And I like the way you say that, even though it seems a little complex when it rolls off your tongue, it's right? Yeah. In the sense that it's timely and only someone in the transaction would know about it. And then they take that and they quickly figure out, okay, who's vulnerable in this situation based on what I'm reading? Because some way they're going to monetize this work that we are just describing right now, the business email compromise. And then from there, it moves to social engineering. So let's talk about that pivot. So now the bad guy has line of sight to invoices being paid. Let's stay in real estate, money coming in from a buyer. Let's walk through how social engineering now gets somebody to believe that they're sending money to a trusted party when in fact it's the fraudster masquerading as, let's say, the title company in the transaction.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so they have that line of sight into that transaction, right? They know when the money's going to be coming in. So they'll take, anything they can, a thread of emails, all the attachments that were in that email. Then they'll copy pretty much word for word the signature line, even the confidentiality notice. Then they'll create a very similar
the wire fraud notice.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
The wire, exactly, 100%. And we both seen this. And then they'll go and they'll create, say, in this case, they want to create a spoof domain, right? And say they want to go after certified or Sun title. So they'll take suntitle.com, and that's already taken, obviously. And they'll instead just add an extra letter in somewhere, whether it's, instead of an I in title, it's a number 1, or they'll add a second T in the word title, something like that, so that it looks very similar to the domain that the victim is used to communicating with. Then for as low as, like, I don't know, $5 a month, they can set up the email service from that domain and just start sending emails to the victim with all of that stolen information already that we talked about. And it has all the good information that the victim wants to see. It has the closing disclosure potentially. It has, the HUD statement. It has all that. So as the victim, they see that and they're like, oh yeah, this is trustworthy for sure. Then they go about other certain things like changing the phone numbers in the email block, because you think to yourself, okay, I got this email, this is a little weird. I'm going to call the title company and make sure this is correct. Well, our bad actor had actually just changed the phone number in the email block to one of their phone numbers. And so you call the phone number in the email that you received, and it goes right to the fraudster. And they further use social engineering to convince you to send that wire. So they're taking more and more steps. And as you've seen, and as we've talked about, over the past almost this whole year, is how all the red flags we used to see are slowly going away because they're embracing technology now. They're embracing different things they can use, different tools to make their social engineering that much better.
So let's talk about that. And before we leave the email spoof, because in a lot of ways it could come in through voice and then they'll pivot to text or email. From a title company, we've seen it where they just make the domain look as believable as possible. They could register a Gmail account, but it'll display as, let's use our brand, Sun Title, right? Mm-hmm. And unless that user, who's probably mobile in the application, in the response, clicks on that and displays that full domain, it'll look like they're just communicating with their SVP officer from the same brand.
Exactly. That's another great tactic that our bad actors use. We call it display name masking, where it's really simple setting in your email settings, where instead of it just displaying the email, you want to display your name. So instead of it being my email address, blah, 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 at usss.dhs.gov, it will just say Stephen Dougherty. So you can kind of make it say whatever you want it to say. And if you're looking at it quickly and don't have the wherewithal to actually check that backline email address, you really have no idea who it's coming from.
And then I'm going to say this wrong, but is it called hexagraphic? I understand that there's another way to register a domain off of different characters than just the English letter words. And I know I'm not saying this right, but I understand also that there's a whole nother layer of domain registration that it is actually going to appear, even if you click on it, from @SunTitle or @Acme Title.
Yeah, there are tactics as well doing that as well that makes it look like it's the exact domain you're supposed to be communicating with. Various different methods they can use, whether it's even just doing, now we've seen that, they're just not .com anymore. There's hundreds of different iterations where you can have a domain.
.cam, remember we saw one with .cam that showed up that was reported from a potential fraud, and that scared the heck out of me, frankly.
Yep, exactly. So it's
and not one that you can register in GoDaddy, for example. So some of these new domain variants are almost like these specialty domains, and I don't want to get too off guard, but you just have to understand. And I think the frustration that we have on the private sector side is you can never prevent somebody from being spoofed. You can't prevent your customer, your vendor, or even your primary brand or your employee from being spoofed. You just can't. You couldn't register enough domain variants to cover every possible iteration, because to your earlier point, they'll just do it by Gmail and then just make a setting that looks like it's coming from your trusted domain.
Exactly. Yep. And there's so many different vectors that these guys can use, that our threat actors can use to really, again, enhance that social engineering aspect of the attack.
So I hope you appreciated that back and forth with Stephen and I. And those of you that joined late, you might be wondering why is Tom on camera here and on camera here? We pre-recorded and then kind of spliced together the best of reel of the conversation I had with Stephen. And I could talk with Stephen for weeks on end about what we're seeing and how these trends are happening. But just because of his schedule and our schedule, we wanted to make sure we had the content laid down. The next session, it'll be a little bit shorter. Now we move into not only the evolution of BEC, but how social engineering is enabled through advanced technologies. So let's give this a listen a second.
You and I have been talking about beating the drum on social engineering for years now together. Let's talk about what I'll label, I guess, social engineering 2.0, and it's the intersection between the tactics they know work and AI and some of the infrastructure that they have invested in. Walk through, let's just frame 2023 as Chad and Bard and others became kind of mainstream, not only in text, but also in voice. I mean, as you know, we were together in a closed door meeting with some very interesting folks, and we were mocking up each other's voices in AI. And what are you seeing play out, and how quickly is that maybe being adopted or weaponized on the social engineering front?
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing it right now, and you and I had gotten particularly verbose, and I think very good at educating people on what the red flags were if they saw one of these emails. You know, we always like to pick on the word kindly. You know, the English would be off, the grammar would be off, the syntax would be off, right? Now, all that's gone because you can write perfectly worded emails in seconds using one of these AI generated formats. I've shown you the experiment where I used one of the generative AI platforms to create an email to convince a homeowner to send their down payment to crypto, right? I showed you this. And what was even scary about it was I didn't mention anything at all about a home purchase. The only thing I said was, hey, generative AI platform, draft an email convincing somebody to send their down payment in crypto. That's it. That's all I said. And just from that, the platform inferred that I was talking about buying a home. They gave a perfectly written email with a great paragraph that convinced the supposed victim why to send money in crypto, right? And think about that from a lay perspective. This is really what I want to put out there, how effective these things have gotten. Well, I'm going to use myself as the example. I have a 2-year-old. My wife is 8 months pregnant. I work way too much. I travel all around the world. Imagine if at the same time I was trying to buy a house, right? I'm not in this field. I work in a different job, but I'm just as crazy busy. And I get that email from my title company that says, hey, we're allowing cryptocurrency payments for your down payment. So now I don't have to go to a bank. Now I don't have to do anything. From my couch, I can go to my banking app. I can take, the $100,000 I need out of my banking app, send it to my Coinbase, my Binance, whatever wallet I have for crypto, and then send that off to the wallet, they tell me, from my couch in a matter of 2 minutes. That sounds amazing to me in terms of convenience, right? And to a lot of people, due to the hectic nature of life, they'll fall for that because of that. And that's the inherent social engineering that we're seeing now, that 2.0, using the AI and generative platforms we're seeing out there.
How do you think of AI and maybe platforms like Spoof Card, where you have text and you have phone number spoofing, as it relates to a traditional failsafe of callbacks? And I'm not trying to indict callbacks. We still implement them, almost daily in cases where there's just these rough edge cases to know that but where in the world are we able, because here's what I struggle with. Some of the conventional wisdom we have about confirming identity is being challenged by the application of technology like AI in what you can believe or not. In generative AI over voice, I mean, I did it to you. Hey man, I just scrape a 10-second voice marker offline, and I can type and make your voice say whatever you want, Stephen. And yeah, it's not a 1-to-1 like it is as we're recording now, but it's close enough. I mean, It's close.
It's definitely close enough. And I've actually played that for colleagues, and I've asked them, hey, was that actually me? And, a couple of them that I've known for years and years that know the way I talk, they're like, yeah, that seemed off. And then other people are like, no, I would have sworn 100% that was you. And think about that, right? And think about, as a realtor, as a title professional, and, your brand is to be out there, right? You need to be well known. These things are out there online and in public domain that can be taken and then used to create that AI to convince, somebody that you actually are their realtor. And you can use tools like SpookCard and others where, instead of it going directly to your phone ringing, it'll automatically send it to voicemail. And you think to yourself, oh, I just my phone didn't have service or something for that quick second, but you listen to the voicemail and it's your realtor's voice saying, hey, Tom, you got your closing coming up. Everything's looking great. I sent you an email with the wiring instructions. Please go ahead and get that done. I'm going to be out of pocket for a little bit, but trust me that those are the correct ones. And you have the voicemail. So now you have the email and the voicemail that matches your realtor's voice. Think about how powerful that is, again, to further trick a victim to send money.
Yeah, or I'd layer it up. I'd send a voicemail just like that with the realtor directly to voicemail. But in the message, I'd say, look, hey, title company escrow officer, I'm a listing agent. I'm in a spotty cell coverage area. So if I sound a little bit weird, forgive me. I hope this call hangs on. But I'm going to have the seller call you with instructions on where to wire the net proceeds. And I do the same darn thing for a seller, because we got to take a step back in this industry. We have no relationship with the customer that we could say, hey, like Stephen, if you called me, my biometric marker in my brain, however that's stored, we've talked hundreds and hundreds of times, right? So I would know that. I'd have something to compare it to. But we don't have that in real estate, because we typically see a customer once every 12 years now, if we get the deal back. And I think the challenge that I'm seeing is it's really kind of pressure testing. Can you even trust a voicemail? Truly, can you truly trust a voicemail? And I would say no, if that voicemail is calling you to act immediately upon some transfer or some exchange of an asset or something like that.
So before leaving that topic, I was at I'd mentioned earlier, the Florida Land Title Annual yesterday morning, speaking on this very topic. And I would argue again that we really need to think about voicemails and some of those electronic communications that are coming over, especially if they're asking either ourselves or one of our employees to initiate a funds transfer. Even if it sounds like, a real estate agent or a referral partner, a lender, a developer, builder that's been working with you, or an attorney for decades, it doesn't matter. The generative AI, I had mentioned this, I used 11 Labs. So if you guys are on the more technical side, you want to play around with a couple platforms, 11labs.io is an open platform. It's like $10 a month. You can literally put in a voice memo to yourself from your iPhone, and then you'd be able to take that memo, upload it, and you can type in whatever you want it to say. And as Stephen mentioned, as this gets posted online, I would be able to scrape or record anything that you'd see on YouTube or Vimeo, or in, a video uploaded to, TikTok or to Instagram or Facebook, and you can mimic those markers. And once they have that voice marker simulated through AI, you can just type in exactly what you want it to say. You save that file down, and you use a platform like SpoofCard where you could push it directly to some type of a direct voicemail. And then they layer up to say, okay, now that you have the voicemail, you're going to be more susceptible to receiving, opening, and believing what's in the email. And the premise of my talk yesterday was really about trust. So when we talk about social engineering, we talk about how people get tricked, and we can shame and blame people all day long, including our customers and our vendor partners, for a lack of awareness. But at the same time, they believe they're doing the right thing. They're so well socially engineered because they infiltrate a network of trust and communications that only trusted parties would be able to share and have access to, that's where that breach and that vulnerability really increases. So 11 Labs, you can do voice over AI spoofing. And then Spoof Card is an app that you can get for those of you that are doing lunch and learns, for those of you doing CE for real estate agents. I would 100% put that into your arsenal, because it just, like yesterday, the room was eerily quiet. And I had, for those of you that might have been there, hundreds of people were in this room, and you could hear a pin drop when I was walking through these platforms. They're very, very powerful. And the hope is just to tease out during the rest of these segments I have with Stephen to really take a step back and say, okay, are there vulnerabilities in my standard operating procedure? Are there any vulnerabilities or the scenarios where we could fall more susceptible or even be victimized by some of these new technology or these new layers? So, all right, now we're going to pivot a little bit. We're going to talk about fraud syndicate growth and how efficient they're becoming as business operators. So everything that we've seen, and for those of you that don't know the background, while co-founder of CertifID, I'm also a large title agency owner. We're victims of wire fraud. We've been through this experience at a very intimate and professional level, and it's organized crime. These are bad actors operating at scale, trying to get a return on their investment as quickly and as efficiently as possible. So I worked through with Stephen 2 different segments here. One is the fraud syndicate profile itself, and then we veer off into how money laundering is changing rather rapidly with real-time payments and other forms of electronic currency. So we'll listen to this next segment together.
Where is AI in this technology taking out layers in the fraud syndicate? So clearly, if we think about the arc of this whole thing in wire fraud and real estate, and again, wire fraud, guys, I've been explaining, is just the way that they monetize social engineering. And it's tracked through BEC, which is the national cyber crime that we're tracking from a statistical standpoint. But they harvest information, they socially engineer somebody. Those two, in my opinion, are the crime. You could disagree with me, but I think the crime is already said, because wire fraud really is the voluntary transfer of funds from the victim to another account. This isn't under duress. They're not going into the Federal Reserve and hacking the reserve and redirecting in real time. These are all voluntary transfers, which makes it very, very hard on the back end to recover, and why the banks say they're not going to be responsible, because look, this was a failure to validate or verify. But early days, clearly, Stephen, they had boots on the ground, people that were part of the syndicate reading these international players on US-based real estate transactions. Mm-hmm. How do you think that has changed, and what efficiencies, if any, are they seeing now?
So back in sort of the Wild West days, as we would call it, of wire fraud, it was a much more robust group of individuals that they needed to pull off these fraud schemes, right? You needed a whole litany of people to do this, and you needed to have kind of very specific or technical skills in this area. Now you don't. That's the whole scary thing that we've seen in 2023 is the introduction of what we call non-technical actors, right? You don't even need to speak English now to launch a proper wire fraud. You really don't. Again, using the AI platforms that are out there, you can type in whatever language you're used to communicating in to say, in proper American English, write this email for me, and it will. So now you don't have your person who's sitting there just writing emails. Now you don't have your person who's just sitting there, spoofing domains. It all can be done kind of by one person in a much more efficient way. Now, I'm still not saying that those organized crime groups have gone away. They still very much are operating in that way, but they've just gotten a lot more specific in what they do and how they do it using technical aspects. So they don't need to go and get that high dollar email writer anymore. They can have one person write 30 emails a minute and launch them all out, instead of having, a German speaker, a French speaker, an English speaker, whoever they want to attack. Now it's just much simpler for them to do it using this technology that's out there. And then even now, the money laundering aspect too has gotten a lot easier using some of the technical aspects that are out there.
Last year, when we saw the IC3 report, investment fraud, and that was more pig butchering, crypto scams that kind of leapt ahead a little bit of BEC. BEC was on an absolute tear as the number one fastest growing and largest loss component of cybercrime. But when we spoke recently live, your prediction was that BEC is going to be, the front runner again. And real estate continues to be, I believe, the largest loss vector as a single industry, SIC. Is that fair still, that real estate will remain a top target? And if so, like, color that a little bit.
Absolutely. So as these fraud schemes have evolved, right, our threat actors have gotten smarter. They've learned more and more about the space that they're playing in, right? So before, when we first started really looking at this, they loved just targeting that down payment, the closing costs, right? They knew that was the upfront that they could see, that they could get after. But then they realized, how many different transactions are there involved in real estate?
Yeah.
We could have 7, 8, 9, 10 transactions on one portfolio, correct?
On one transaction, yeah, meaning how many transfers in and out before something is fully settled, recorded, and insured. You're exactly right, man. I mean, if it's a commercial deal, sometimes there's 20, 30 disbursements if there's a syndication of people getting paid off.
Split closing or what have you, and
yeah.
And our guys have gotten into real.
Look at you learning the lingo and the lexicon, brother. This is
I'm ready to go and get my real estate license here.
You got some serious chops, man. I'm gonna continue to rip. That's great.
But so our bad actors have gotten in and they've seen all of the other transactions that are involved, because they're supposed to sitting monitoring all the email traffic, right? Our victim still doesn't know that, hey, their email's been breached. So, they talk about the closing and that went well, and our bad actor maybe failed to get that done, right? Maybe their email got caught or whatever, but then they know, hey, on the back end, they're talking about, the seller net proceeds or the mortgage payoff that's involved, coming from the same file. So they're like, oh, well, let's target those. We've even seen the real estate commissions get stolen in the same vein. So, as our threat actors have gone into it, they realize, hey, there's so much more meat on that bone. So they just keep going after it, which is why real estate is just, I would say from my experience, is probably the most vulnerable sector that's out there, because there's so many factors that go into it, and our threat actors have really learned the space themselves.
Well, the amount of open source information, right? We can do a whole hour on open source, but the fact that you have an open public process to solicit offers on a property, to your point, you got multiple players involved, largest asset of people's lives. We're tracking north of almost 30% of deals are cash deals now because of interest rates. So people will take liquidity from one area, let's say the stock market, because I think it's going to be soft. They'll move it over to say, I'll buy my kid's house and I'll just have them refinance a couple of years from now. We're seeing that all the time. Or I'll just pay cash for the vacation or the second home, or I'm downsizing and I'll take the liquidity here on my net and I'll add to it. And I don't see that changing, regardless in current, the last 24 hours, the idea of the MLS and commissions, it's going to be interesting how this thing plays. But either way, there's going to be a platform and a mechanism to increase, offers in an open market area. And the concern is, like we talked about this, what other transaction can you identify that is absolutely taking place right now? And real estate's one of those only ones. Maybe a car. So, okay, you're listing a car for sale, an RV, but the house is the big one.
Exactly.
Because I don't know who owns the car, but I know who owns the property. And I know who the agent is that's listing it.
And you know who the title company is that's going to back it. The county where the deed is going to be recorded. All of that stuff. All of that is easily harvestable, open source information.
So as you listen to this, if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A channel. I have that bot up, or that panel opened in part of another screen here. We're going to dive quickly into real-time payments and what that could mean for money laundering and the success of recovery should funds land in a fraudulent account after an RTP transfer.
Do you think real-time payments will have the same dramatic effect on money laundering that crypto has had? Do you see it in that same vein? Do you see it worse, not as significant?
I'm hoping it to be not as significant. It has the potentiality to be worse because at least with crypto, we can still work to kind of claw that back in different ways. You know, we can sometimes reach out to the exchanger and talk to them before the money is actually dispersed to a wallet while it's sitting in the crypto exchanger's actual bank account and get that money stopped and moved back. With real-time payments, by nature, they're irreversible.
That's an important distinction that I guess I never thought about, because when you're moving between wallets, you have an intermediary where it's sitting, and then if you can get to that intermediary before it hits that final destination wallet or gets transferred into fiat currency somewhere in another bank, I guess I knew that, but I didn't think of it in those terms, that you have a minute there where you have a third party to say, hey, we need that back. But RTP by definition is account to account. Is a direct transfer.
Yep. And again, and we've been told this, that it's non-reversible. It's instantaneous. That money's there. It's gone. Boom. There's no way.
It's true. I've read the standard operating procedures bank to bank that were issued by FedNow, and I would 100% agree it is irreversible. Yep. You're not clawing that back.
So even more caution needs to be taken with those.
So in Florida, the topic of RTP came up, and RFP, which is request for payment and request for payment of an EMD or a cash to close. If you have not educated yourself or your teams on RTP and sat down with your financial institution or institutions, I recommend that you do that. The pilot was launched in July of this year. It is gaining traction. Think of it as almost like a Venmo or a Zelle, where you have a peer-to-peer, but you have a much larger rail. The Federal Reserve does act as an intermediary, but it's like intermediary light. It's a very instant transfer. They're required to settle inside of 120 seconds. You cannot pull an RTP payment back. Most of them will settle inside of 60 seconds. So if you don't have line of sight to that, I think we'll be speaking much more about RTP payment, RTP fraud 12 months from now. I hate to say that, but again, as these technologies and these rails provide convenience and efficiency and more transparency of payments on the law-abiding side, they also provide opportunities for bad actors. All right, last topic I talked to Stephen about is seller impersonation fraud, the fastest growing fraud. Yesterday, we pushed out another national release on this with the help of Stephen and our law enforcement partners at the Secret Service. It has been an epidemic this year. News stations, litigation, and essentially the fraud setup is where a bad actor goes through the public record, identifies vacant or unimproved property, impersonates the seller, hires a listing agent. It's a cash deal, mail away closing. The title or the closing attorney gets the title agency or closing attorney gets the package back, funds it, and then it could be days, weeks, months, years. We'll be reporting on these, that years later, the seller identifies that somebody had improved a property that they didn't even know was being sold out from under them. So let's listen to this on seller impersonation fraud.
Seller impersonation frauds. Yeah, I know this is a very hot topic, but I say that because none of the other frauds have gone away.
Yeah.
Buyers are still getting lifted. You know, mortgage payoffs are still the #1 disbursement side risk. Seller nets, commissions, you know, are really, really high, especially in some markets. But let's talk about just this massive, I would just say, onslaught. I mean, I'm sitting in West Michigan right now. We have over 30 confirmed cases of seller impersonation fraud since March of this year. And that's just this year.
We're seeing it across the country. You know, you name it. I've had investigators from all across the country. You and I, we first really started picking up on this about a year ago, right? I would say not even further. Then we really saw the uptick this past winter. We put out multiple advisories from our parties and from you guys to target this, and then we've just seen the reports kind of start to roll in. And it's still happening. And what's scary about seller impersonation is, you know how I talked about that data breach that needed to happen, so that information that needed to be stolen that was, you know, locked down potentially. With seller impersonation, you don't need to do that. It's all open source information. You can find out exactly who the owner of a property is. You know that it's vacant, you know that it's unencumbered, and you know that the person who owns it probably isn't looking at it or paying much attention to it. And so real easy, you just develop, impersonate their identity, very easy. You can buy fake IDs, passports anywhere on the dark web for, again, pennies on the dollar to be that person, and you can get the process going. I did a news piece last week that I hope you guys are able to run with and highlight. It was from information from you guys as well. But we got one of the victims to come talk, and the victim, they had discovered that their land had been put for sale and that they were impersonated because a for sale sign had been put up on their land, right? So, they get it taken down, they caught it and everything. Well, what happened about 3 weeks later? Their land went up for sale again because they were impersonated again, and they just used a different realtor and a different process. So not only are these things, easy to pull off one time, but you can keep going back and just hope you get somebody complacent or somebody that's not paying attention enough and swipe their land right from under them.
Yeah, no, I agree. Let's talk about money laundering. What have you seen as far as recruitment of, well, I've been wanting to ask this for a while to you directly, has the ratio changed when we, either through information we're sharing or others, that there's been a misdirected fraudulent transfer into an account? That account holder, has there been a change in that account holder is a knowing money mule, a witting money mule, or an unwitting, unknowing money mule that's get recruited because of a romance scam or some work from home scam or elderly abuse? Has there been a change in that? Because that from what I've seen recently is more unwitting scam victims that have been victimized themselves, flipped into money launderers, and they just don't even know it.
Absolutely. Again, I've been investigating business email compromise cases since 2016, right? And back then, those are the fun days of investigating BEC because all the money launderers, pretty much most of them at that point, were witting money mules. So you can easily just follow the money, go find the money mule, interview them, interrogate them, hit them with charges, and work your way up the chain, right? Now, when we find that money for the first time, when we go talk to that money mule, the person who received the victim funds, 85 to 90% of the time now, they're a victim of some other type of fraud scheme, namely a romance scam scheme. So essentially what's happening is these people think they're meeting somebody online. They're getting into a quasi or romantic relationship with them, where generally they're convinced first to send their own money. So they're told, oh, hey, I'm working on an oil rig here. I have this project going on. I can get off it and come live with you. You just need to send me like 10 grand. And victims will fall into that, right? And then they'll be like, are you coming? What's going on? And they'll be like, oh, I got in some trouble. But hey, I have money coming in that'll pay you back and it'll get me to where I need to go. I just need a bank account. And, you're in love with this person. So you're like, sure, here's my bank account. No problem. Put your money in. As soon as it comes in, tell me what you want me to do with it. And that's exactly what happens. They say, okay, my $500,000 coming in, keep the $10,000 for yourself to make yourself whole, and then send the rest of my money here so I can get off this break. Right? Happens every single day. And like I said, about 85 to 90% of the cases we investigate now have some form of that type of fraud scheme built in now to further obfuscate our threat actors from the trail.
So I get the question a lot, and that's, are the bad guys ever brought to justice? You speak to that.
Yes. So we at Secret Service, we pride ourselves on being able to locate these threat actors and bringing to justice whatever way possible. We travel the world to do it. We have numerous international partnerships, whether that's with Interpol, whether that's on a country by country basis, whether it's joint task forces set up across the world to target and locate these groups. And we take a kind of a multi-pronged approach, right? Obviously, we want to arrest and prosecute these individuals, but also we want to disrupt and dismantle their networks and make it much harder for them to operate. Because as we do that, they can make mistakes, right? They'll pivot in a way that they're not used to doing. So they maybe will leave something that allows us to figure out who they are or where they are. And then boom, we're on their trail.
Stephen, we could talk all day, but I want to get you back to doing that work right there. So, any parting advice? You know, on this webinar, we'll have you know, countless title agents, closing attorneys, real estate professionals. Any parting advice as we think towards bookending this year and then going into 2024? So what is your crystal ball kind of reading if we were sitting here 12 months from now, which will likely be looking back on 2024? Where do you see the variance and the opportunities for us to level up as an industry?
You need to stay vigilant on every transaction. There's no room for complacency at all in this business, because as we've seen, everything can become a target. And really what we've seen, Tom, I think in 2023, and that we'll continue to see in 2024, it needs to be treated that it's a when scenario, not an if scenario. It's a when a situation is attacked or when a transaction is attacked. So you need to think of it that way. And you need to have yourself prepared and ready to deal with one of these if it does happen, right? How do you mitigate it? Even if you do see it and you stop it, what do you do from then on? You know, you need to know how to report it. You need to report it to the IC3. You need to report it to law enforcement. You need to report it to your banks. You need to have all these things in place, and you cannot allow yourself to become complacent.
I completely agree. We don't talk enough about incident response. And it's a reminder, you and I should probably do an hour just on incident response. Yes. Because when you're talking about a window now that's collapsing between like today or tomorrow to mitigate, you know, or fully recover and having any type of statistical chance, that's a tight window. You can't be hunting around for phone numbers and contacts and this and that. You got to hit play.
Exactly. 100%.
All right. Care for you and the team deeply, Stephen. Thanks for the work that you do. It's absolutely amazing. The partnership, I'm speaking for everyone on here and the industry as a whole, that we truly appreciate the awareness, the education, but just having an outlet for us to go in like the worst moment of our lives. And that's, we have a customer sitting at the closing table saying, well, no, I didn't bring a check. I wired you money 3 days ago and there's no money. Or, you know, you wire out, you know, a huge disbursement off of a mortgage payoff or a seller net or a direction of funds. And, you know, in large part, it's a self-insured risk right now. So anyway, I know I've said it before, but it's amazing work that you guys do. So with that, guys, we'll sign off. And Stephen, take care, man. Thanks for taking a minute.
So the last two videos I'd like to share are from our underwriter partners. Many of you, if you're not aware, you know, the Mr. Cooper incident took place last week, and our underwriter partners are kind of ears to the ground to keep us informed. I want to play a quick video from Michele Green from FNF, who's Senior VP of National Ops, and then Tara Smith, who's President of Agency Services for Stewart, just to provide a little underwriter perspective from their vantage point regarding not only mortgage payoff fraud, but other forms of fraud that are taking place on the agency network. So we get this one to play.
As we sit here in 2023, wire fraud is indeed you know, probably the most significant risk to our agents and their customers. As wire fraud has grown and evolved over the years, from seller proceeds wires to buyer cash to close wires, mortgage payoff diversions, and now these seller impersonation frauds, the so-called vacant land scams. All of these are wire fraud crimes perpetrated by essentially the same type of organized crime syndicates around the world. And I spent the last decade trying to warn our agents about these attacks. Many agents today, even here in 2023, are still surprised to learn that they're not covered under any insurance policy for losses associated with the accidental failure to properly confirm wiring instructions. They still think that their business is covered. But when other people's money leaves agent escrow accounts using unconfirmed and fraudulent instructions and then disappears forever into the criminal underworld, agents are responsible to replace these lost escrow funds, and you can't purchase insurance for this risk. I've seen agents go out of business, have to get mortgages on their homes and take out large loans. A lot of sad consequences of wire fraud. The agents who are successfully managing this risk and avoiding loss, other than just by luck, they have to stay completely up to date on the changing landscape of wire fraud. Wire fraud continues to evolve and change, and the agent risk management practices have to be as current as the latest news. Agents who've made it a priority to understand these current risks and who have looked into all the options available, including the use of CertifID to share in this risk, have described the decrease in their stress level for their entire company as life-changing.
Couldn't agree with Michele more. So now let's listen to Tara. Tara and Tyler, our CEO.
So wire fraud continues to be one of the greatest risks to our industry, and we're constantly looking for solutions that will help us be the best partner for our agents. And we really wanted to find a solution to help our agents protect both their business as well as their customers' business. And we have a pretty strong vetting process when we work with vendors, and really felt that CertifID provides the end-to-end solution, protecting both the customers and our agents as well. We really have found it to be a win-win, protecting the agents and making their business stronger, protecting the customers, which in turn makes happier customers, and then also reduced claims for Stewart as a result of the partnership. As of today, we have over 150 agents using CertifID's products. The majority of those agents are also using specifically the Payoff Protect, which protects agents against the mortgage payoff fraud. And a large benefit we've seen are agents who have utilized CertifID's fraud recovery services as well. Those that have fallen victim to wire fraud and reached out to CertifID to help them in recovery efforts.
Yeah, and a lot of times those are the ones that ultimately then become customers later on.
Of yours and ours.
Yeah,
if
for
they're
sure.
not Stewart agents today.
Absolutely. You know, we've actually recovered over $60 million with those fraud recovery services of recent. So it's been a really good program overall.
For sure.
Guys, with that, I recognize I'm a couple minutes over, but I want to thank you for attending today. Hopefully there are some takeaways, and I'll go back to our team when we were talking about some of the proactive, rapid response, email security, some additional webinars that we can do that could provide value not only to your team internally, but also as you're out educating your referral partners and ultimately those that you are seeking to do business with, especially with all the disruption taking place in real estate in the brokerage community right now. I think there's a place where you can, put a further stake in the ground saying, we're the most educated, we're the most intelligent, we're the most secure, and that matters. It certainly matters in this day and age. So with that, I'm going to sign off. Everybody stay safe, and we will see you on next month's To Catch a Fraudster series. Take care.